Julie faced me when she got to the door. Thanks, Braden. Are we going to meet up tomorrow? Absolutely. She stood on her tiptoes and gave me a gentle kiss on the cheek. Her fragrance stayed briefly as she turned and walked into the hallway. She was really pretty, no question. She looked back and waved once before she disappeared. Right after I closed my condo's door, she began. Don't you think she's a bit young for you? I stopped, looking at the door, and for a second I wished there was a mirror on it so I could see my own expression. I waited, but nothing happened. Perhaps it was all behind me now. Perhaps I had moved past it. I tried to find any anger, but it wasn't there. She's young, Melanie said. Can't speak for the rest, I answered. I passed by her without a second glance and entered my loft, suddenly craving a drink. I checked the fridge quickly, found my usual fruits and veggies, chicken thawing for dinner, but I lost interest. Yogurt, milk, energy drinks, and beer filled the shelves. I grabbed a beer, just one from the 7 left in the case I bought almost a month ago, a far cry from my first year after the divorce. I heard her heels clicking behind me, a contrast to my bare feet. I popped open the bottle, placing the cap in the trash where it belonged. Everything was orderly, neat, clean, just the way I liked it. Moving through the living area, I crossed invisible boundaries between the open spaces. Kitchen, dining room, office, bedroom, gym, living room. The furniture, top-notch but not matching. The living room had its own eclectic mix. 2 black leather lounge chairs on one side, a love seat opposite a large TV, and my favorite recliner, big enough for my tall frame. Each piece had its own story, its own reason for being there. Everything except her. Not even offering me a drink, she said. It was the first time I really took a good look at her. She showed up unannounced, the first time I'd seen her in 8 years. I had to admit to myself she looked good, even beautiful. But looks were never the issue. I wouldn't want you thinking you're welcome here. You're not my guest. If you need something, find it yourself, I said. She spun on her heels and went back to the kitchen. That sass, I'd missed it. It was her trademark, and she knew it. That's why she often wore skirts that said, "Yeah, I know you're looking." I let my eyes roam from her enticing figure to her long legs, to the straps around her ankles, to the 4-inch heels of her pricey shoes. For a moment, I let my primal desires take over, imagining her movements were for my pleasure. I expected longing to set in, a reminder of the pain and heartache of losing something. Instead, I felt something different. Maybe it was pride, a sense of, yeah, I've been there. She returned with her wine glass and Chardonnay, her eyes hiding her true intentions. For the first time, that didn't scare me. You're looking good, Braden, she said. Feeling good too, Melanie, I replied. The game had begun, and it felt refreshing not to be on the defensive right from the start. You're not even curious why I'm here, not even a little bit, she asked. It's not that I'm not curious, you can never have too much info, I explained. Her smirk hinted that she thought we were on equal footing. I just don't care. Even in unexpected situations, Melanie had a way of keeping her cool. I knew that well, so seeing her flinch even for a moment felt satisfying. She turned to face the wall, a stretch filled with framed photos of my journey. It was a reminder of how far I'd come and the lessons I'd learned. Rock bottom. That's what I called it. I'd heard it mentioned. I never thought I'd feel it. But that's where it all began. Right after Melanie divorced me and shattered my life. I won't sugarcoat it. Our marriage wasn't perfect. We struggled early on, scraping together every last dollar. But we were young, hopeful, impulsive, committed. We didn't believe in early failures. Soulmates don't give up. So we made memories, searching for change for a fast food meal, sharing a cupcake on our first anniversary, making Christmas ornaments from paper and crayons, then laminating them for our tree the next year. Each year they went up, a reminder of us. Even when you're in love with someone, they can still be annoying. Melanie had this thing where she'd rearrange stuff constantly. She'd shuffle around the kitchen utensils, spices, or everything in the hall closet, making sense only to her. Just when I got used to the new setup, she'd change it again. It wouldn't have been a big deal if she remembered where she put things afterward. Hey, where are the scissors? They were here somewhere, right? They're not where they were last week. Did you move them? She'd ask. Probably. I can't remember. Just keep looking. They're around here somewhere, I'd say. I often had to buy replacements for things that went missing, especially if I needed them urgently. Sometimes it would take weeks for stuff to turn up, and we were tight on money, so any extra spending was a hassle. It was a bit irritating. But most of the time, I didn't think about our financial struggles, probably because of the closeness. My heart raced whenever she was around. She was as eager as I was. If we had 5 minutes alone, clothes were usually off. I loved hearing her voice when she was desperate for more. Afterward, I'd admire her tired but perfect body, glowing with sweat on her beautifully tanned skin. She was young, soft, and curvy, a rare combination. And her looks? They were a giveaway that a good time was coming. The closeness was incredible, and I never got tired of her piercing blue eyes. Memories were what mattered most. After our divorce settled and I closed the bottle, I had a realization. Those tough years, when we didn't know where rent money would come from, showed me that together we could survive anything. But for Melanie, those times were a nightmare she never wanted to relive, no matter the cost. I observed her browsing through my photo collection. Her eyes betrayed her, lingering on pictures of places we once dreamed of visiting together when our dreams seemed out of reach, but shared. She exuded sensuality. The glass swayed in her hand, the wine matching the sway of her hips. As she looked up at the top row of pictures, her blonde hair cascaded over her silk blouse, revealing the graceful lines of her neck. "I guess those trips were real," she commented. "They were," I confirmed. She studied me again, as if trying to predict my next move, but I had no moves left. "You've changed," she observed. "I don't think so. I'm still the same person, maybe just more me and less you," I fired back. "That's what I mean. You never used to say things like that to me," she noted. "Life is full of things we want to say, plan to say, and dream of saying but stay silent. We either lose ourselves in that silence or lose who we're meant to be." Are we pretending to be someone else? I wondered. I had pondered this question a lot. I came to the conclusion that we try to be who we think we are until someone reveals our true reflection, and we can't keep up the facade anymore. Some handle the truth better than others. That smirk seemed to be back. I sensed it. "What's changed now?" she asked. "You can't take anything more from me. We're completely disconnected." "So, you can't hurt me anymore," I stated firmly. She began to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. I wanted to believe she was touched, but I wasn't convinced. "I want it to end. I didn't initiate it, but you have the power to stop it," she pleaded. "I'm not sure if that's entirely true. Even if I could, I'm not sure I would." "It seems like you're enjoying this," I pointed out. "Not really. I don't want a constant reminder that the person I once loved was deceitful and unfaithful." "I'm not sure why," she confessed. It wasn't anything new, but this time it seemed to sting, even if just a bit. And now, I'm smarter. Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake, as Sun Tzu said. I wasn't prepared for the devastation of our first conflict, but this time, I wasn't alone either. Rumors had been swirling for months. Everywhere I went, people were whispering. The economy was taking a nosedive, and in that climate, any job was as good as gold. Layoffs seemed imminent. Walking onto the factory floor was bad enough. I could feel eyes on me, watching my every move. People would stop me when they thought nobody else was listening, asking if I'd seen the list. But the worst of it was at home. Melanie was on edge, asking me daily if I'd heard anything. Was my job secure? Did I have a backup plan? What were we going to do? I didn't have a concrete plan. I didn't think I needed one. My boss seemed trustworthy, assuring me not to worry, so I didn't. But it all went south when others intervened and made the final decisions. Looking back, there were signs I missed, possibilities I only recognized when it was too late. Our bed life took a hit. I chalked it up to stress. My mood wasn't as high as before. I blamed myself more than her. Then the bomb dropped. Melanie knew I'd been laid off before I even stepped foot in the house. My boss was shocked when he let me go, considering I had the highest team production and quality rating. Melanie, however, didn't bat an eye. Sadly, that wasn't the only commitment about to go up in flames. Melanie gave no indication that our marriage was in trouble. She played the role of a devoted wife effortlessly, with loving gestures, home-cooked meals, and a spotless house. She became even more of a domestic goddess in those final weeks. She made sure to tell me she loved me every time I left the room, perhaps to hide her guilt. And then, I was served divorce papers while waiting for company-provided resources for displaced workers. When I got home, I found the locks changed, my clothes packed in boxes in the driveway, topped with another copy of the restraining order. My severance pay should have lasted months, but I had to decide. Fight the divorce and custody battle, or survive. I chose to fight, but I was overpowered. Lawyers, psychologists, judges all agreed. I was mentally offensive and unfit to parent. Unemployed and broke, I felt worthless. They made it official in legal documents. The final blow came with a desperate idea. If I could talk to April face to face, she'd understand. She was 9 then. old enough to say she loved me and wanted to see me. So I hid behind bushes, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, staring at what used to be my home. That's when I saw them together for the first time. My wife, my daughter, and the company VP. He was the boss's son, a womanizer and a terrible manager. But he had power, and I was nobody. He was a strange-looking older man with a thick wallet and my family. I'll admit my hatred colored my view, but all I could see was ugliness. That night, I took my first drink to numb the pain. It became a year-long binge. It might have lasted forever, but then I saw her one more time. I was wandering the streets, looking rough with my messy beard, dirty clothes, and a strong smell preceding me. I was close to being homeless, although my rundown apartment in the old building barely counted as a home. She came out of a fancy boutique downtown, loaded with bags, searching for her keys in her designer purse. I probably scared her. She didn't know what to protect first, her stuff or herself. But I was too lost in my drunken haze to be a threat. It took me a while to recognize her. She gasped, covering her mouth in shock, then drove off a few minutes later. Later, I stole a beer from the store, struggling to open it without a bottle opener. Melanie had rearranged the kitchen as usual, making it hard to find anything. After a mess, I found it. But Melanie was gone, and it wasn't our home. Everything was where it should be, though. That day, I quit drinking and left town with a backpack and about $50. It wasn't tough to quit. I wasn't an alcoholic, just a broken man hiding in alcohol. For the first 18 months, I roamed around, walking, hitchhiking, and occasionally taking a bus. I did odd jobs to earn enough money to move on. Money was tight, but I kept my eyes peeled. Whenever I found myself somewhere, I made camp. There was always a place to sleep, shower, and grab a meal. I treated myself to anything intriguing from the used bookstores I passed. I could get a dozen books for the price of one movie ticket. So, I read, jotting down anything I wanted to remember or any feelings in a beat-up notebook. It became a diary of both pain and discovery. I stayed updated on world events through discarded newspapers, even if they were often outdated. But honestly, the news didn't really affect me much. I also engaged in conversations with people, mostly listening. People loved to talk, and I was good at listening. Once I splurged on a used digital camera from a pawn shop. I took pictures to remember the places I visited, the people I met, and later on, the things that inspired me. About once a month, I'd spend around $5 at a chain drugstore to transfer all my pictures from my memory card to a compact disc. After a year and a half, I settled in a small, dusty town in the middle of the country. I landed my first full-time job after the divorce, working in the warehouse of a fertilizer factory. Days were spent hauling stuff around, and nights were for chilling in my rented room above the local garage, reading and writing. I traded my notebook for a used laptop and spent my free time at the town library, using their free internet to upload my thoughts and pictures to a blog. People followed me, left anonymous comments, and even though I was writing as a way to cope rather than for therapy, I liked knowing that people were interested in what I had to say. I liked it a lot. Melanie paused at the only picture I had of my old family, a strip of photos from a booth at an amusement park. April was just 4 years old then, her ponytail tied up with pink ribbons and her newly pierced ear sparkling with fake diamond studs. The bright flash couldn't outshine the smiles on all three faces. Each photo captured a different moment, surprise, silliness, and genuine laughter. I could help you reconnect with her, help you get in touch. "Oh, so you're all informed about what's going on with your daughter," she said sarcastically. I could see her trying to read my expression for clues. It must have been tough for her not to be in control, not knowing if I was ahead of her or not. "You should be proud. She's turned out just like you." There was shock in her eyes at that remark. Maybe even some regret. She paused to look at that particular photo too. I think she was surprised that the images didn't match her memories, or perhaps what she'd been told. It's hard to say for sure because she didn't say anything. I never considered myself a writer. In my past life, I worked my way up to a production supervisor at a big manufacturing company, earning that title after 4 promotions. Being a writer wasn't on my radar. It wasn't even a dream. But that didn't stop an online men's magazine from recognizing my blog as one of the best on the web. They even offered me a column, starting monthly and later becoming weekly. The pay wasn't amazing, but it opened doors. 2 years later, I got a surprising email from a publishing company. They wanted to see more of my work and even proposed publishing a book, despite me not having one. I sent them a jumbled collection of essays, and they assigned an editor who asked for an opening chapter about how my journey began. So I shared my story with an editor for the first time. Then, nothing happened. at least not for a few years. I figured my work wasn't up to par, but I kept at it, continuing to write my blog. My column gained popularity, and while the money improved, I felt bored. So I left again, this time heading to Europe. There were no youth hostels or discounted train tickets for a 35-year-old guy, but I traveled across the continent as cheaply as possible. I saw places I'd only read about in textbooks or seen on TV. I visited historic sites and embraced new cultures. From Europe, I journeyed to the Middle East, then to India, and spent 3 months exploring Asia. Everything, the languages, the culture, the food, was a fresh experience for me. I experienced true poverty firsthand, not the shallow excuse I used to complain about. People remain the same everywhere. They love to talk. After being on my latest journey for 14 months, feeling eager to return home, I received an email with a sneak peek of my book cover attached. That's when things took an interesting turn. I came back home to a flurry of agents, editors, publishers, and lawyers. Thanks to the growing popularity of my column, there was a buzz surrounding my book. Leveraging that buzz, I negotiated a significant raise from the magazine, mainly based on a complex ad revenue formula. It was more money than I had ever made before, and it was plenty for me. So I returned to my hometown to start a new chapter in the place I grew up, loved, and missed dearly. Unfortunately, when my book was released, the response was average at best. It didn't meet the high hopes some had for it. Frankly, I wasn't too surprised. Most of my sales likely came from my loyal blog and column followers. The lackluster sales meant my career as an author was probably over before it really began. Then someone went on TV and accused my first chapter of being a bunch of lies. It was a local reporter from my hometown who asked the questions. Was the story in my book true? Had he taken my job and family and spread lies about me in court? He could have stayed quiet, but he didn't. While the story barely made a ripple elsewhere, in my hometown, where the son of a wealthy businessman and the ex-wife of an author were involved, it became a juicy tale. And whether out of shame or arrogance, he took it too far. He sued me for libel and defamation of character. The publishing company seized the opportunity they needed. After investing time and money in vetting, editing, designing, and distributing my book, they were eager to make a profit. They unleashed a team of high-priced lawyers and PR experts on my former employer, aiming to recoup their investment. I watched from the sidelines. It wasn't just about him and me anymore. The controversy surrounding his actions brought free publicity, boosting my book sales to bestseller status. It's funny how life works. Some people never know when to quit while they're ahead. Did you hear the board asked for his resignation? No, I hadn't heard. Frankly, I'm surprised he lasted this long. Productivity dropped significantly after his drastic cuts in the first year, and it continued to decline. Sales plummeted, morale sank, and your ex-husband was never cut out for leadership. I wasn't shocked that she didn't defend him. She never would have taken a bullet for me either. Why do I think you already knew? Because you're cold, calculating, and heartless woman. It's a shame, though, because based on the divorce papers I signed for Julie, he's going to need a paycheck. Was that your lawyer? She's not mine or yours. She's a paralegal working for the firm representing my publisher. I've been trying to tell you it's not about me, though I seem to be benefiting a lot. I guess karma really does have a way of coming around. I could see the comeback forming in her eyes. There were so many things she wanted to say, but realized I had the upper hand in every scenario. I hoped she'd give me the chance to use some of the one-liners I'd been itching to say, but at the same time, I wished she'd just leave me alone. So why are you here? That caught her off guard, but she quickly regained her composure. Oh, now you're curious. No, I just don't get what you think you can achieve, she said. He should probably appreciate your love enough to save what's left of his failing business, she continued. But, like I mentioned, it's not my call. I analyzed her reaction, exactly as I anticipated. But your affection isn't for him, is it? It's for his wealth, she noted. Oh, the irony. He had it, but now, ironically, he'll have to give it to me. And you, once again, will be left with nothing, she declared. What, you think you can't find another wealthy benefactor to exploit? She probed. You're underestimating yourself. You've still got a great body. You'll figure something out. Or, in your case, probably land on your back, she joked. It wasn't like that, I countered. I don't think I've ever laughed that hard in my life, I added. She couldn't possibly believe otherwise, but her defensive posture and eyes suggested otherwise. I was momentarily surprised. Could she truly be unaware? Was that even possible? Oh my God, you don't know. What does that mean? I stayed silent for a moment, quickly considering the situation, but I couldn't see any downsides. After months of interviews and legal proceedings, it was all part of the official record. If she genuinely didn't know, he must have known she'd find out. It wouldn't hurt the case to tell her something that would soon become public knowledge. You're right. It wasn't like that at all. I may have spoken out of turn. It was all innocent, right? Yes. It was almost a whisper, and I thought about asking her to repeat it, but I refrained. Sure. He was simply reaching out to his employees' families, ensuring they knew about the situation at the plant, ensuring everyone was ready for the worst-case scenario. Naturally, he focused his attention on the most vulnerable, particularly mid-level management. We were the ones most at risk, so he believed his personal involvement was crucial. She listened attentively, but her thoughts were a mystery to me. So he invited you to lunch to give you a heads up. Nothing was set in stone yet. It was all preliminary. Occasionally, he'd call to update you on the employee evaluation process. Then came more casual lunches, more phone calls. But then his approach changed. He opened up about the stress of his decisions, the weight of people's livelihoods on his shoulders. The offers he received to save jobs were shocking. Money, even favors. It must have been startling for Melanie, given how wide her eyes were. As I spoke, I walked over to my desk, searching for the right file. Once I found it, I continued. And that's when you sealed our fates. That moment marked his victory and my defeat. It was when your trust in me as a man, father, husband, and provider succumbed to your greed. That's when you gave yourself to him and shattered my world. I slid the papers across the table. She stared at them for a while as if they might burn her fingers. I'd never seen the list myself. I always thought they were a myth. But my publisher's attorneys sifted through thousands of documents during discovery. The one she held wasn't particularly remarkable, except that my name was at the top of the list of employees to keep. Based on the dates, it seemed to be one of the earliest lists created, perhaps even the first one. The second list was much more intriguing. Although the names were the same, it included John Davis's almost illegible notes and check marks next to several names. My name and one other were crossed out with a single red line, with mine labeled by one word, Melanie. Only one other name was marked that way, surprising the attorneys that he had kept it. But then again, he was always foolish. The third list, labeled Final and printed on his own letterhead, unsurprisingly omitted my name. Her eyes darted back and forth, likely trying to process the situation, though she wouldn't believe the answer her mind provided. Now you're probably wondering how I know all this, I said, observing her dumbfounded expression. She stared back at me, slightly open-mouthed. It wasn't a flattering look for her. You'll figure it out. You're not that dense, I remarked, implying that she could connect the dots. Feeling the urge for another drink, I got up from my chair and headed to the kitchen. I dropped some ice cubes into a glass and slid it under the refrigerator's water dispenser. I had learned to resist urges, opting instead for decisions made after careful consideration of potential outcomes. Plus, getting drunk around Melanie usually led to trouble. As they say, closeness is one of the most natural things in the world, when you can afford it. Now that we're laying everything out, I have a question. Did you ever truly love me? Melanie had been fixated on the documents for about 20 minutes. After 5 minutes, I noticed her grip tightening and her hands shaking. A few minutes later, her expression became completely neutral again. She hadn't uttered a word during this time, so I decided to break the silence. But it seemed she wasn't keen on answering my question, as she barely met my gaze before quickly looking away. I wanted to pay closer attention to Melanie, but her presence in my loft was puzzling, making it hard to focus. I had many questions and needed answers, but her sudden appearance made no sense to me. It hadn't even been 48 hours since Mr. Moneypants' lawyers requested a settlement conference. That night, my attorney and my publisher's attorneys celebrated impromptu, as this move was nearly admitting defeat. Yet, in a world of sharks, these guys were the killer whales. They didn't avoid conflict, they sought it out. They were determined to find a fight, enjoying not just victory but also the humiliation of others. I was certain none of them had read my book, which contradicted everything they stood for. Still, having them around was comforting. Having been on the losing side before, with only righteousness on my side, being utterly defeated wasn't enjoyable. So, yes, I could have easily been seen as a hypocrite, but I hadn't initiated this journey, so I went along willingly. Lost in these thoughts, I glanced at Melanie once more. She looked as stunning as ever. It made me smirk, knowing I'd been right all along. I used to tell her she'd only get more attractive with age. I couldn't figure out why she had dolled herself up like that. She seemed ready for a night out or perhaps a hunt, and then it hit me. Oh my God, you were sent here. I don't think I'd ever seen Melanie so furious. Actually, I don't recall ever seeing her angry at all, even during our worst fights when we were married. She'd been disappointed, annoyed, and scared, but I hadn't realized the depth of her fear. That's what made her affair so devastating. In a sea of unlikely outcomes, Melanie leaving me felt like a distant possibility. Even now, after years of reflection and rebuilding my confidence, I knew I'd never be the same. Soulmates don't give up on each other. But she did. She must have been desperate. The lawsuits and legal fees added up to $12 million. He was wealthy, but not that wealthy. The lawyers estimated the judgments would be close to $7 million. They tried to explain their reasoning to me once. My book was titled Property and Asset Valuation, and his lawsuit was baseless, backed by evidence showing he and his lawyer knew it. It seemed like the one with the better story would win. His error wouldn't leave him completely broke, but it would be a severe blow. Without a steady income, like the cushy job he had before, the outcome would be devastating. It was the only explanation. He sent her to halt me and make one last effort to salvage what mattered most to him: money, the need for a wife, and a family. Melanie glanced up but remained silent. I was sure she had no clue what I meant. I had to give him credit for keeping her clueless. Unlike me, who couldn't hide even the tiniest secret from her, mainly because guilt would consume me. I suppose having a conscience wasn't one of John Davis's priorities. Some board members began questioning him. Why was he still single? When would he quit his womanizing and partying? They didn't really care about him or the women, but it could spell trouble for the company. Having the next CEO involved in a bed scandal isn't good for business. He straightforwardly proposed to Stephanie Carmichael for her money. Given she was involved with him for cash, he likely assumed she'd say yes. Stephanie, often labeled a 304 around the plant, and her husband David, whom I considered a fool, were quite the talk. I hadn't witnessed their escapades firsthand, but the rumors were rampant. Usually rumors stay rumors, but with them, I believed there might be truth. Stephanie always dressed a bit too revealing, leaving suggestive remarks, while David boasted about his wife's attractiveness and tried to catch others admiring her. Despite her past as a daytime stripper, I found her appealing, yet her questionable background remained hearsay. However, the scandalous tales surrounding them seemed oddly believable. One-night stands, wild house parties, swinging, and the possibility of compromising pictures and videos circulating on the internet were all part of the gossip. I wasn't sure if any of those rumors were true, but what I did know for sure was that David Carmichael's name was also crossed off that list, alongside Stephanie's. David mysteriously vanished right after getting fired. Despite always thinking she was a bit of a ditzy blonde, Stephanie proved she wasn't as naive as she seemed by keeping gift tax records. She had records for 3 years, showing he gave her nearly $150,000 for their biweekly meetings. Stephanie, who preferred to be called Steffi, spilled the beans about Davis's attempt to woo her with gifts and was upfront about their transactional relationship. We had a deal. He gave generously, and I showed my appreciation in return as best I could. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, I met him at the condo he rented for me. While my husband and I appreciated his gifts, as soon as Davy finished nursing school and returned home, I ditched that fat jerk and his tiny tool. Stephanie also had no problem explaining why he continued seeing her even after marrying Melanie. I glanced at Melanie as I finished speaking. It seemed he was seeking something he wasn't getting at home, like BJ. I wasn't sure if Stephanie was telling the truth until I saw Melanie's reaction. Then I knew it was true, although she could be lying because it doesn't sound like the woman I married. I could see she was on the verge of breaking down. She hadn't made a sound for almost an hour. I realized if I wanted to confront him, I had to do it soon. So, what did he instruct you to do when he sent you here? He told me to stop the lawsuits by any means necessary. Does he often ask you to do such things, or only when he's about to lose his fortune? He's not my boss. He's my spouse. No judgment here. I know firsthand how attractive you are and what effect that can have on a person. It can make you believe things that aren't true. So, when are we going to get to the part where anything goes? Honestly, the convincing argument part has become boring. What will it require? She said it without much conviction. It was the only time I felt even a little sorry for her. It was just hard for me to understand. How could someone so beautiful, lively, and energetic lack self-confidence? How could they let themselves be used like that? For money? Honestly, I can see the appeal to some extent. My favorite chair cost me over $1,000. When Melanie and I furnished our first apartment, I don't think we spent that much on everything combined. So yes, it was extravagant, but it was also incredibly comfortable. Still, I'd trade all those luxuries for just one more day with Melanie in our tiny, cozy first apartment, just like old times. I suppose that's just a difference between us. Like I said earlier, even if I could, I wouldn't stop it. I think you should go back to your husband and tell him I wasn't interested in his offer. Reconnect with him. Discuss how to navigate this rough patch in your life. With a love as strong as yours, I'm sure you'll make it. I observed her. I watched her lovely lips, longing to kiss them. I observed her elegant silk blouse, slipping slightly from her gorgeous neckline, revealing a hint of her delicate, probably expensive underwear. It took all my self-control not to give in to the urge to have closeness with her. After all, soulmates always stand by each other. I anticipated a tear, but it never came. Yes, her eyes welled up with water, and for a moment I thought she might cry. But she didn't. I had to acknowledge her strength, at least for that. "Get out of my house and don't bring your cheating self back here," I said firmly. Closeness without love may be empty, but it's still pretty damn good, as Woody Allen said. Our conversation had lasted a couple of hours, but I hadn't planned on sleeping with her. Honestly, I hadn't thought about it much at all. There were too many other thoughts swirling in my head. The weeks leading up to that night had been full of surprises, but she was attractive, and I was a man, and she made an offer. "What do you need for a refill?" I asked, taking her glass and heading to the kitchen. I poured more of her chosen wine and returned with her glass and the bottle. "I read your book, twice," she said. Normally, I would have responded with a witty remark or a sincere thank you, but I was captivated by her presence. I would have been able to find my words easier if I hadn't been distracted by what happened to her blouse, feeling a bit sorry for myself for missing its vanishing act. Luckily, I got to watch as she took off her skirt, and I wondered if all her adventures and self-discovery had led her to this moment. She stood there in her nearly see-through black lingerie, confirming its transparency when she effortlessly removed her clothes. They say exploration improves your bedroom skills. I've been told I'm quite good. Oh, I have no doubt about that. We made love, and then I collapsed exhausted on top of her. Her delicate fingers tracing my spine brought me back from my peaceful slumber. "Jesus Christ, Braden! Your ex was an idiot!" Julie exclaimed. "Oh, Julie, you always say the sweetest things," I replied. "The best revenge is to live on and prove yourself," as Eddie Vedder said. Julie stayed with me every night for the next 4 months, while the legal matters were settled. We had passionate love throughout her stay, but she always insisted, no matter how amazing it was, she'd return to New York once the lawsuits were done. I didn't hold any grudge against her. Maybe lawyers, even those with just a few hours left of law school, don't stick around the kiddie pool, no matter how many times they come sniffing around your business. Yet, the time we spent together, short as it was incredible. That first night we spent together, she was at my place explaining the latest lawsuit, the one from my daughter who was suing me to protect her inheritance. I can't honestly say I didn't realize Melanie was furious when she left that night. She was downright livid. But I genuinely believed she was mad at me, perhaps for turning her down or for taking what she thought she rightfully earned. Turns out, I was mistaken. I can't even begin to imagine what it must have been like for him. I was devastated when Melanie didn't choose me when faced with something as ordinary as a company downsizing. But then again, the coroner's report didn't provide much clarity. John Davis might never have known. Hours after she left me and barely conscious from alcohol, Melanie pointed at him and did that once, straight in the groin. The fragments tore through his femoral artery. Then she aimed the tool at herself. She probably passed instantly, but nobody could confirm if he lived long enough to realize she'd rather end herself than sleep with him when he was broke. I can't fathom what that must have felt like, but I hope he had a moment to really mull it over. Anyway, I spent days being angry at Melanie, not for my sake, but for her daughter's. As messed up as Melanie was, her daughter needed her. No, April hadn't shown any sign that she and Melanie were close. Quite the opposite, actually. Yet she seemed like a lost little girl, the one and only time she visited me. She couldn't recall who I really was, which surprised me a lot. I thought she'd be old enough to remember, but constant lies can overwrite memories. She clearly didn't buy it when I told her. Once upon a time, we were happy, a family together. But now, there's no one left to vouch for it. One photo among many on the wall couldn't convince her otherwise. She was bitter at Melanie's funeral, and I totally got it. Unfortunately, months later, it seemed like I was still her top enemy, with little chance of changing her mind. When the final decision came and her inheritance was nearly gone, she stormed out of the courtroom, narrowly avoiding a contempt charge for her angry outburst. That was the last time I saw her. I don't hold out much hope of seeing her again. The bond we once had seemed as fragile as the one between her mom and me. But maybe fathers and daughters are different. Maybe Mr. and Mrs. John Davis didn't permanently turn her against me. Maybe someday she'll realize she can always rely on her dad for help. Or perhaps she'll find her way in the world. Or maybe find her true love. Hopefully someone who won't abandon her.